Welcome to the Therapist HQ, your weekly pep talk for private practice pros. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome back to the Therapist HQ podcast. I'm Alicia, and I'm really glad that you're here. Whether you're driving, walking, making lunch, whatever you're doing right now, I'm just so grateful that you're spending a little bit of time with me today. Before we get into today's topic, let me catch you up on what has been going on in my world this week. So, something kind of exciting. One of my interns has asked to lead a group in my practice. And while I led lots of groups in my time in community mental health, it was actually a really exciting journey for me to add one into my virtual group practice. And with a little bit of back end setup, we had our first successful group held in my practice this past week. And I feel like this has just opened up a whole world of possibilities now that I have the infrastructure behind me to hold these groups or allow the therapists in my practice to hold these groups. I am feeling off to the races on types of groups that maybe I would want to offer in my practice. If you offer groups in your practice, please leave a comment and let me know what kind of groups you're offering and if you're enjoying them. I have always loved groups, either process groups or even psychoeducational groups. So this is a part of my practice that I am feeling very inspired by, and I'm really excited to see what other group offerings we come up with in the future. Back to the episode for today. On the field side of things, if you've been paying attention to the business landscape in private practice lately, there's some data floating around right now that I think is worth naming. The 2025 Financial State of Private Practice report that came out from HERD confirmed what most of us were already feeling in our gut, which is that therapists billing private pay are earning about 36% more per session than those who are billing insurance. That gap has real implications for how we structure our practices, and it ties directly into what I want to talk about today, because today's episode is all about growth, specifically the kind of growth that came out of one of the most humbling seasons of my professional life, if I do say so myself. So today's episode, when I was thinking of a topic and a title, I'd landed on how I decided it was time to move to a group practice. Catchy, right? And I want to be very upfront. This is a lot of my personal story interwoven. It's not necessarily a how to guide, though you'll probably take some practicalities from it. It's more like the conversation that I wish I'd been able to have with someone who had been through it before me. So here's where I was. I had my first baby in July of 2020, and I was over the moon, genuinely over the moon. But I was also suddenly living this completely different life than the one I'd built my practice around. My partner and I were juggling both of our work schedules, figuring out childcare, figuring out what our weeks even looked like now that there was a very teeny tiny human with his own very strong opinions about timing. And what that meant for my practice was that my actual time to sit with one on one clients had shrunk immensely. It didn't disappear, but it definitely shrunk. A meaningful chunk of my working hours was now going to admin, to running the back end of the business, to just keeping things moving and up to speed. And when I sat down and looked at my numbers honestly, I realized something a little uncomfortable, which is that I had hit a ceiling. And I want to be clear, this wasn't because my practice was struggling. It was actually doing really well. The ceiling wasn't necessarily about demand, it was about capacity, which is something else that kind of threw me at that time because I had referrals coming in almost every day, really, which for a solo practice is something that I'm incredibly thankful for and that I worked incredibly hard at when setting up my practice and setting up all of my marketing efforts. So, as a solo clinician, my revenue was entirely tied to how many sessions I could personally hold in a week. And with a baby at home and real constraints on childcare, it was the thick of COVID. It was July of 2020. Childcare was really non existent for us just because of the state of the world at the time. And we had just made the decision to sort of keep that in house between my partner and I. And with these constraints on my schedule, the number that I could see as far as clients go just dropped. I could optimize all I wanted: up, down, backwards, forwards, tighten up admin time, batch my tasks, get more efficient. But I kept bumping into that same wall. The math of solo practice, it just doesn't bend past a certain point, and your income will always be capped by your own clinical hours. And as we're talking about this, and while we're talking about demand in private practice, I do want to take a quick second to introduce today's sponsor for this episode, which is Mentaya. So imagine this: a potential client reaches out, loves what they read about you, books a consult, and then goes quiet when they hear that you're out of network. Now imagine that they check their benefits and find out they qualify for reimbursement and become one of your longest standing clients. That is what Mentaya makes possible. Their benefits checker takes seconds, their claim submission is fully automated, and therapists who use Mentaya consistently report growing their private pay caseload as a result. Don't let cost be the reason that great clients walk away. Go to mentaya.com and use code TherapistHQ for a free 30-day trial of the benefits checker, which is usually a $29 value, completely on them. Mentaya.com, code TherapistHQ. So I started asking myself a different sort of question. Instead of how do I see more clients, I started asking, what if I could keep my referrals in-house? Because at this time, like I said, I still had referrals coming in, and I had great colleagues that I could and did refer a lot of them to. I did have a couple ask to go on a wait list with me, which I really didn't practice and still continue not to practice. I just personally, very personal belief, I just don't really believe in wait lists. And while I allowed them to be on a technical wait list with me, I encouraged them to continue looking for a new therapist. And what I explained to them was the wait list essentially meant that I would check in with them sporadically and make sure that they were able to find care. It did not mean that they should stop their search altogether and wait for me to have an opening, because I honestly just didn't know when that opening would be. So, this question of what if I could keep these referrals in house? And honestly, that question felt a little scary at first, because moving to a group practice isn't just a scheduling change, it's a whole identity shift with the practice. And I knew this. You stop being just a clinician and you start being a legitimate practice owner in a much more serious and more responsible way. Now we're introducing people whose livelihoods start to involve you. And that's really real. And I don't want to gloss over that. And trust me, I still have that anxiety every time I onboard a new clinician of, this person has trusted me with their livelihood, and I need to show up in a way that honors and respects that. But I also think group practice gets made out to be a little bit more complicated, maybe, and more intimidating than it has to be. So let me just tell you a little bit about how I actually thought about it. At its core, a group practice is really just a practice where more than one clinician sees clients, right? That's the whole thing. You don't need a big office, a receptionist, a waiting room with nice plants. I mean, my entire practice started out and is still virtual. You can start with one additional clinician, which is what I did. You can grow slowly and intentionally, which is what I did. And the financial model shifts in a way that's genuinely meaningful when you do. Instead of all of your revenue coming through your personal caseload, you have other clinicians whose work also generates income for the practice. The typical structure involves a fee split. The practice collects payments and pays the clinician a percentage, and that percentage varies based on your overhead and your model. But the fundamental change is that the practice can earn revenue even on days when you personally aren't in session. For me, that was a huge reason, and that was really the whole point. I needed a business that could flex with my new life as a mom. And alongside that, I really love like the management of the business. Like I love expanding my business and bending and flexing my business. And this was kind of a new way to do that. Now, I'd be doing you a disservice if I made it sound simple as sunshine and rainbows, because there are real things that you do need to get right. The legal structure matters enormously. The difference between hiring an employee versus an independent contractor is something that varies state by state and has significant tax and liability implications. And you need an actual attorney to advise you on that before you bring anyone on. Your systems need to be super solid, solid enough to support more than just you. This involves your EHR, your intake process, your scheduling, your documentation workflow. They don't need to be perfect, but they need to exist in a form that someone else can step into and use without you holding their hand every single day. And you need to honestly reckon with whether you're ready to be a leader, because that's what this becomes. You are the one setting the tone, the clinical culture, the expectations. You're the one they'll come to when something gets hard. And that's a really beautiful responsibility, but it is a real one. Something that I want you to think about if group practice is even a distant thought in your mind right now, the decision should come from your actual life and your actual numbers and not from what you think the next logical step is supposed to look like. I didn't move to group practice because it was on some checklist of what I felt like a successful therapist does. I moved to a group practice because my life had changed and my practice needed to change with me. And this was something that I genuinely wanted and was ready to take on. You have to ask yourself whether you've genuinely hit a structural ceiling, not a temporary one, but a real one, and whether bringing on another clinician would solve a problem you actually have right now. If the answer is yes, then start learning. And if the answer is not yet, that's completely valid and you don't need to force it. The piece that I keep coming back to is this: private practice is yours. That is the whole gift of it. You built something that belongs to you. And that means you get to decide what shape it takes, when it grows, how it grows, and whether group practice is part of that picture at all. What I hope you take away from my story is not I should start a group practice, but rather I am allowed to let my business evolve alongside my life, because you are. And that kind of intentional evolution is exactly what keeps this work sustainable for the long haul. And just to peel the curtain back a little bit more, because I have had folks ask me in the past about this evolution of hiring and how quickly or how slowly I did it. And like I mentioned, the intentionality was very real for me with starting this group practice. I hired on one clinician at a time. I never posted on Indeed. I always posted on my social media channels and in social media groups for therapists in our area or therapists throughout the state, because we are a fully virtual practice. I was very lucky that I knew the first therapist who applied to work for me from my time in community mental health. And so there was already sort of this like base relationship and trust in that relationship. So I hired my first clinician, I filled her caseload, and then I kind of revisited all of these questions that I mentioned of like, have I hit the ceiling? Is this a real ceiling? And is it time to hire another? And so once her caseload was full, I started the process again. I posted the job listing, I interviewed, I hired the next therapist, filled their caseload, and I kept the cycle going. Throughout my time as a group practice owner, so from 2021 to this year, 2026, I have had 3 or 4 therapists come and then leave. The rest of the therapists I have had stay with the practice. They like the work that they're doing, they like the systems that are in place, the billing and the pay they feel satisfied with, and things are just working for everybody. And that is the whole point, is that I wanted to make these systems as easy as I could for myself and for the therapists that decide to join me in the group practice. I am able to raise my income, even if just a little bit, and provide support to these therapists to do the work that they love without this administrative burden of running their entire whole practice by themselves, because they have the infrastructure of my practice to lean on. And so it really has been a really beautiful thing and worked out thus far for all parties involved, which what more could you ask for, really? So, before I move us into our closing segment, I want to make sure that you know about two ways that I can support you directly. Because if there's one thing about me, I love working with you and supporting you and walking alongside you in this path. If you're in the earlier stages of building your practice and you want a roadmap that takes the guesswork out of it, something that walks you through business formation, the forms and scripts you actually need, how to market yourself, all of it. My private practice launch kit is exactly that. It's everything in one place, so you're not piecing it together from 100 different sources at midnight. You can find the link for that in our show notes from today. And if you're already in private practice and you want a community of people who genuinely get what that is like, monthly consult calls, weekly social media prompts, monthly expert trainings, a whole resource library, and even a custom GPT to help you with admin and marketing. That is exactly what the HQ community is. And you can come join us. The link for that will be in the show notes as well. Okay, and now we have made it to my favorite part of every episode, which is Therapist in the Threads. This is where I pull something from usually the r/therapist subreddit, and we just talk about it because that community tells the truth in a way that I really appreciate. And I'm also low key scared to bring in threads from therapist Facebook groups. And so Reddit is the next best option. Okay, therapists in the threads. This one is so good and it fits perfectly with what we've been talking about today. So this post is from r/therapist. It is from a third-year therapist who is doing really well, seeing 25 to 30 clients a week at their full rate of $100 a session, loves the work, loves the flexibility, and they're already thinking ahead. They want to open a group practice someday, and they want to do it in a way that actually takes care of their clinicians. Billing support, utilities, an EHR platform covered, marketing handled, a fully stocked break room. I love that they included that. And they're asking what split other therapists would find worth it 30, 75, and what else they'd want included. And the comments are genuinely a masterclass in what running a group practice actually looks like from multiple angles. One commenter works for a group practice that doesn't pay the highest split, but they get 80 hours of PTO, a 401k, paid supervision, paid consult groups, free CEUs, and weekly mind body offerings like yoga nidra and sound baths for clinicians. Their whole point was there are things that compensate for a lower rate that you might not think about when you're just looking at the percentage. And that really stuck with me because I think a lot of therapists evaluate group practice offers solely on the split and miss the full picture of what they're actually getting or not getting. Another commenter actually ran a W-2 telehealth group practice and has since closed it. And their comment is worth its weight in gold for anyone considering this path. They said, know your legal documents inside and out before you start. Employee handbook, policies and procedures, ethical separation agreements, know your insurance panels, and follow the strictest guidelines across all of them. Don't contract anyone to do something until you know how to do it yourself because you won't be able to catch their mistakes. Brilliant. And they said the thing that haunted them most was the liability, the cash flow gap between paying staff and waiting on insurance, chasing reimbursements, chasing note completion deadlines. And they just said that, frankly, they just don't miss that. Their attorney had recommended W-2 over 1099 for protecting both the practice and the staff. And then there's a comment that I think every aspiring group practice owner needs to read twice. Someone who currently runs a group practice explained that they end up around a 50 to 60% split with clinicians and then walked through exactly why. 10% goes to payroll taxes for W-2 employees, 5% goes to a biller, and then there's office space, liability insurance, an accountant to manage payroll correctly, the EHR, and a long list of other things. Their point was, people imagine the practice owner pocketing 40 or 50% of everything that comes in, But the reality is, there's not a ton left after expenses. Running a practice is genuinely expensive, and the split that looks generous on paper can get eaten up pretty fast if you haven't mapped out your overhead. I agree with that. What I want to say to the person who wrote this post, and honestly to anyone listening who has had this dream, is that the instinct you have, the desire to build something that doesn't take advantage of clinicians, is exactly the right place to start from. The therapists who struggle most as group practice owners are the ones who underestimate the cost of doing it right. The ones who succeed are usually the ones who did the financial modeling before they hired anyone, got really good legal and accounting advice early, and built the infrastructure before they even needed it. Your dream is a good one, a great one, really. Just go in knowing what it actually costs to build it well. That is all for me today. Thank you so much for being here today. You are building something that matters, and I don't take that lightly, and neither should you. I will see you next week. Take care of yourselves and take care of your practices.